And so as like elementary aged Nate got to sit in the back seat of a Volvo, my brother, for like 10 hours of driving to make our way back to our parents' home. I can remember the frustration of Alabama. We lived on the panhandle of Florida, and so the journey from Florida to Alabama didn't ever feel so bad. But then you hit Alabama, and it was just freeway and trees and nothing exciting to look at. And that was the majority of the trip. No different now than if I was going to drive there from here. Wisconsin would feel like a concrete jungle nightmare of a road trip portion for me. But we'd make the journey, and when we would get back to Kentucky, I can remember we would drive into the Louisville, and Florida didn't have some of the restaurants that we had loved about Kentucky. And so as weird as it sounds, what I most looked forward to was White Castle. Apparently some of you also have poor eating habits. I haven't had White Castle in a decade, at least at this point, but when we would get there as kids, we didn't have White Castle in Florida, and so we would get in and we would get White Castle right before we would go to my grandfather's house, and Pappy would welcome us at the door, and he had always prepared for our arrival, and so there, even though he was diabetic, there were always fresh snickerdoodle and chocolate chip cookies that had been made for us, and sausage, egg, and cheese balls that had been made for us, hanky-panks that were in the freezer and ready for us to warm up. And my brother and I would argue over who got to sleep in Dad's old bedroom and who was going to be sleeping in the base where we belonged. This is what's happening for the people of God. This return has been made, and they're getting home, and things look different for some of them who may have not been born in exile but had lived there before. This is wondering why the things that used to look ornate look like rubble. But they're making their way there, and they're saying, okay, we've got to start unpacking the things. And so they've spent time settling in the towns, and we've got to start preparing for the things we're used to and the relationship we've had with God here. What's it look like to get all of that organized? And so it starts then with maybe the most familiar of smells to them, the offerings that they would make on the altar. And so they begin both morning and evening. And then some of the holiday celebrations. Verse 4 says, then in accordance with what is written, again, they're looking back at what God has revealed and aiming to start their new relationship with him on a better note than it had ended with exile. And so they're setting this up in accordance with what is written. They celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles. So we're about halfway through the month now. And they did that with the required number of burnt offerings prescribed for each day. And after that, they presented the regular burnt offerings, the new moon sacrifices, the sacrifices for all the appointed and sacred festivals of the Lord, as well as those brought as free will offerings to the Lord. And on the first day of the 7th month, they began to offer burnt offerings to the Lord, though the foundation of the Lord's temple had not yet been laid. Their hope is to be back in right relationship with God, with his presence to make its home in their midst again. And yet as they're beginning that, they only know how to start the way it had started in their story so far. And so they built the offering out of altar out of field stones and begun making the offerings there. They're beginning to worship again. They're doing it without the temple in place that has been so monumental and important, but this kind of joining together as one kind of spiritual people hasn't happened for 70 years. As the people were exiled, they were scattered throughout Babylon and in other foreign lands, and encouraged to settle there and to live there and to still worship God there, but to do that in the midst of another people. And so for all of those who have returned to gather in one place in Jerusalem, again, it's this momentous spiritual remembrance of what it looks like for the community of God to thrive together, God. And so for the first time in a long time, and the sacrifices are taking place, and the altar's been rebuilt, and they're forward thinking of again. And it starts to give us the time frame of what that looks like. Verse 8. In the second month of the second year after their arrival at the house of God in Jerusalem, Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and Joshua, and all who had returned from captivity to Jerusalem, they began the work. They appointed Levites 20 years old and older to supervise the building of the house of the Lord. It's been about 6 months since they built the altar. They've been offering their sacrifices on it. They made an order for all the materials that would be needed. And while they're waiting for those strong logs to come, and they know that there's parts of the foundation that can be built with stone. And so after about 6 months of offering sacrifices and worshiping well, they begin to lay the foundation again. They start to do so in unity. They put leaders over them. Primarily Joshua and Zerubbabel are going to be the names of the leaders who are organizing the work as it'll take place. It'll list here, it's got the Levites that are then going to manage parts of overseeing the construction of the temple. And everybody that's returned with them from captivity is starting to figure out what their roles will be. It's taking place in the second year of the second month. Again, the calendars can be weird as you're trying to match that with a calendar of today. Assume it's like April or May seasonally. It's a time where, while we recognize most of the Middle East can feel like a dry desert at times, in the Promised Land, this would be the dry season. We'll have just gotten through the rainy and wet season. If you were going to start a construction project, this is the time of year you want to lay the foundation. And so they're starting to do that work. Just a spoiler alert, we'll get further in this next week and the following weeks. As they're aiming to do that work and start building that foundation in the dry season, they're not going to get much further than that. Over the scope of time, it's going to take them 20 years to rebuild the temple. In this moment, they're going to spend about 6 months laying the foundation. And then some opposition is going to come. And as that opposition is going to come, the work's going to slow down drastically. But for the moment, when they're beginning, they're unified. Despite their fears of the people around them, they're making progress. They've established the altar and restored part of their spiritual life together. And the leaders and workers, Jason, my brother, went into the house right away to use the bathroom. And he came back out and said the floor was wet. When we got in, we went to check, and we found that the ceiling in the master bedroom had fallen down onto the bed. The wallpaper was peeling off of the walls. The carpets were soaked in all the bedrooms. Clothes hanging in the closets were all wet. The water pipe in the attic above the master bedroom had burst. There wasn't water coming into the house, but a neighbor came over and told us that the electrical meter reader had come to read the meter, and he heard the water going into the house, and so he called the water company, and they came out and turned off the water from the outside. We figured that the water had probably been running into the house for 3 days. We locked up the house. We went to the Holiday Inn to spend the night. There was a lot of work to be done. We contacted insurance the next day and got a water restoration company to bring fans to the house to help dry out the carpets and walls. We started carrying things out of the house. Our king-side mattress was saturated in water, and as we moved it, the water just kept pouring out of it. We knew that it would be quite a while before we could live in the house, and so we found a condo on Pensacola Beach to rent for a few weeks. We went back to work and school, but came to the house each day and worked. All our clothes had to be washed. A neighbor said I could use her washer and dryer, so I did several loads of laundry every day for a week. All of our plumbing in the entire house had to be replaced. Luckily, we found a plumber who was willing to start the project right away. We also had to pull out the carpet that was very heavy. That was very heavy lifting since it was so saturated with water underneath to start drying. Another friend worked at a flooring store, and so he came and measured and was able to get us carpet pretty quickly. Our insurance agreed to replace everything. We needed to buy a new bedroom set because as the chest of drawers and dressers had warped with all the water they had absorbed. New wallpaper had to be picked out. Again, we knew someone who owned a wallpaper store, and she helped with that and with finding someone to hang it. We were lucky we were dealing with clean water damage and that people were willing to help us. I can remember reading about this, and as an 8-year-old when it took place, I remember the night we got home. I remember the condo on Pensacola Beach. I wasn't likely involved in a lot of the day-to-day work of what needed to take place to restore our house. So when my mom wrote it and I read it, plumbers that we knew. And I'm thankful for people that worked at a flooring company that we knew. And I'm thankful for people that helped with wallpaper that we knew. For neighbors who had understood what had gone on at the house and came to tell us about it. That a community gathered together to do any kind of that restoration and rebuilding is so much better than trying to do it alone. As we're being told the story through the book of Ezra, that's what it's telling us. There were people who took ownership and leadership over this process of restarting right relationship with God and in his presence again, and doing that in accordance with what's been the example of the past and the authority of King Cyrus of Persia. And yet, it's a group that have linked arms together. And there is a lot of work that needs to be done. The rest of verse 9 tells us more about the people that were there, some of the descendants and Levites, and what it looked as they joined together to supervise the work on the house of God. And yet then it hadn't been built yet. It would be built by his son Solomon. They praised God for his dwelling with them. Asaph was the lead priest at the time. He's listed by name. We brought the priests in their vestments and with their trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, reminding us of what it looked like when David had initiated this. They, with their cymbals, took their places to praise the Lord. And so worship begins. The people of God, as they're returning, want themselves to be centered on the sacrifices and offerings they would make to be God and on their praise particularly for God's goodness and for God's love. That's what verse 11 tells us. It says it this way: with praise and thanksgiving they sang to the Lord. He is good. His love toward Israel endures forever. And all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. And I don't know at this point if they're just singing he is good and his love endures forever, if they're shouting he is good and his love endures forever, but it's a phrase maybe you recognize. We have it in many of our worship songs, some of them that repeat it consistently, some of them that say it occasionally. And so instead of the version quoted straight from this text, I just want us to change. I ask you to just say with me, he is good, his love endures forever. Let's say that together. He is good, his love endures forever. Now, reminding us of the way that they say it here for the people returning at that time. And all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord. So I don't just want us to say it. We need to proclaim it like we actually believe it's true. He is good. His love endures forever. I want it to sink in. And so in a moment, we're going to just do something that we don't do very often. Call and response in the middle of a message. So I'm going to say a phrase. You're going to have a response. They're going to put a slide up on the screen that's going to navigate you through it. The first time I say, whatever phrase I say first, you're going to respond, he is good. Hopefully shouting it like you actually believe it. And then as I say a second phrase, you'll respond. Sometimes I can't see the whole picture. Sometimes it's my body that starts to feel strained. Sometimes my bank account feels stretched too thin. Sometimes it feels like other people's love has abandoned me. When I'm alone. When I'm tired. When I need rescuing, when my kids aren't listening, when I'm at my wit's end, when I feel like I've waited too long. God is good, and his love endures forever. And there's a people who have recognized their own distance from God, their own brokenness, and yet as they've come back, they've said, it's time to start again. And they want it centered on the reminder of God's love and of God's goodness. And so they proclaim it and they sing it and they shout it. And yet maybe, like some of you, some of them feel conflicted about it. Verse 12. But many of the older priests and Levites and family heads who had seen the former temple, they wept aloud when they saw the foundation of this temple being laid, while many others shouted for joy. No one could distinguish the sound of shouts of joy from the sound of weeping, because the people made so much noise, and the sound was heard far away. Some of us think back and experience things differently. Some of us come to new places and return to things with great anticipation of fun and joy. And some others think back on it, and what they remember is what was lost and what feels distant and what feels hard. And sometimes a community, we see and understand both of those things felt at the same time. The pictures in my head aren't of tearing up carpet. They aren't of hanging wallpaper or calling plumbers or doing multiple loads of laundry each week. I don't remember possessions of mine that got destroyed or destructed. You know what I remember? Multiple weeks on a condo on the beach. I remember walks in the sand. I remember it feeling like a fun, unique experience. As I think back, it felt like luxury, like a vacation in town all the time. It's as if I was shouting constantly about how good it was, how fun it was, how exciting that change was. And I experienced it that way. Not everybody did. Everything was not replaceable. Paper items that had absorbed water were ruined. We lost a lot of books and picked 8x10 wedding portrait of Mark and I. Stuck to the glass, it couldn't be. How wonderful it's going to hear from God and how excited we are to worship Him. And some of us come and think, I'm only hanging on by a thread. And I hope to see some semblance of a fire of faith burning again. Some of the Israelites showed up, and the stones they saw looked like the beautiful working of a new foundation. And some of them, it looked like the rubble of the temple they used to worship at. Some of them showed up and had extreme hope for what this new gain again with God was. And some people showed up reminded of their faith that felt abandoned by people around them. About how things are being restored. And some of them show up and recognize who's walked away or which families aren't here to see it as they return. Some of them show up and feel like they belong for the first time. And some of them show up and long for the ancient time. Regardless of how they showed up, and regardless of if it was through tears or through statements of joy, they all proclaimed and recognized God is good and His love had. But you recognize as you begin it, even through tears, God is good and His love endures forever. God, our hope, like those returning in this ancient time, is to be a people who set out for a relationship and partnership with you, to place our life on what it looks like to live in the way you've instructed us. Maybe we're coming from a season where we recognize there's been a distance or a brokenness to that, or maybe we become excited about where we are in that. We all recognize the foundation always needs to be built on praise, and that praise can always come from us because you are good and your love does endure forever. Help us to live lives today and throughout this week that recognize that, give attention to that, whether they're shouts or whether they're one last time. We'll together proclaim who God is faithful for. God, we want to be people of peace, and so as we go, go with us in grace and peace. And we'll say together, He is good, His love endures forever.